Hello, and welcome to the FluentReads podcast, where we talk about English and books for growth. Today with me, I have Tobias Vieira, and we're basically going to be talking about one of his favorite books, which is Still Like an Artist by Austin Kleon. Welcome to the podcast, Tobias. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me, Mark. I'm doing great.
Good to hear, good to hear. Okay, so basically, you chose this book, Still Like an Artist by Austin Kleon. So tell me a little bit why this is one of your favorite books.
So I actually stumbled across it by reading another book by the same author, by Austin Kleon, and it was called Show Your Work. I read it when I
Mm-hmm.
was in Barcelona last year in the summer, and I really like the style of the book. Austin combines writing with drawing. It's sort of his style, and it's a lot of creativity. And in my current job, I work as a project manager. I think we'll talk about it later. Um, I think I wanted to bring more creativity into that work, and then I stumbled across this new, or it's not new anymore, but the other book by him, which is Still Like an Artist, and it's been great.
Okay, great, great, great. So let's start with the introduction. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what you do, etc. Yeah.
As you said, I'm Tobias Vieira. I'm from the north of Italy, a region where we speak both German and Italian growing up. And I just finished high school last year in June. Then I went to travel and work in Barcelona, where I did an internship and worked with some startup companies. And when I got back home, I traveled a bit. I went on some train trips through Europe, and I eventually settled back home and got a job working as a project manager in a marketing agency.
Okay, all right. So how often, tell us a little bit about reading in English, reading these nonfiction books in English. Have you done it for a long time, or tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, reading has always been good for me. I remember back to a very young age where I was always reading books, but then it was about entertainment, and then I stopped for some time, and I picked it up back in high school, where started reading more and more in English. The language itself was a little fascinating to me. I started watching movies, and then it sort of started from there. I started reading more and more, and from fiction to non-fiction, a lot of biographies, and it was it became a passion. I think I really like the concept of reading a book in a month, and you can learn about one person's life. Like they can have all their takeaways written
Hmm.
on 300 pages, and you can read that in a month. So that's what I think makes books so great.
Definitely, definitely, definitely. Okay, so let's start diving into the book. So give us a general summary of the book, the synopsis. What is the book about, more or less? Still like an artist.
Describes it really well. It's about the idea of nothing being original and some points where you can get inspiration from. I can go to one moment in the book where he talks about you can't choose your family, but you can choose so many different things. You can choose which people to follow. You can choose what books to read, what movies you watch. You can have all these sorts of information, and you are the one deciding which of the information you will actually put to use. And it's an amazing book. It's easy to read. You have the one side where it's a lot of input, a lot of information, but it's also visually represented by the drawings of the author of Austin Kleon. So I think the mix of the input and the drawings makes it so much creative to me, and it gives you all the ideas you need.
Okay, 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 perfect. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about three of your favorite quotes that you chose from this book, and then we're going to talk about your three takeaways. Okay? So we're gonna start with your first quote. And your first quote that you have here is steal from anywhere that resonates with inspiration or fuels your imagination. Devour old films, new films, music, books, paintings, photographs, poems, dreams, random conversations, architecture, bridges, street signs, trees, clouds, bodies of water, light and shadows. Select only things to steal from that speak directly to your soul. If you do this, your work and theft will be authentic.
Yeah, I really like this quote. It's it's eye-opening to me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was interested in the startup world, which is actually where we met at a startup event, and
Exactly.
I sort of dove into economy and entrepreneurship. And the one thing I struggled with was finding ideas. And I used to destroy my head about finding the one idea I could turn into a business. And so when I read this quote, it really resonated with me. It's like you can get your ideas from anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
and probably the computer is the worst place to get it from. Like you get it from going through the street, watching street signs, strolling through shops, going through to restaurants, and you don't have to be an artist. Um, Obviously, Austin Kleon in the book, it's about artists, but you can interpret it in any way you want. And for me, it's about how you talk to people, how you interact, but also maybe one day if you want to start your own business, then you won't get the ideas from the computer. You get them by experiencing life in the world, and that's outside of your four walls.
Okay. Okay. Great. 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 Um, let's move on to your second quote. At some point, when you can do it, you have to leave home. You can always come back, but when you have to leave at least once, your brain gets too comfortable in your everyday surroundings. You need to make it uncomfortable. You need to spend some time in another land among people that do things differently than you. Travel makes the world look new, and when the world looks new, our brains work harder.
Yes, so this one is mostly about travel. Um, Travel has for a long time been not too big of a deal in my life. Like we took some trips here and there, but I never really um, went on a plane until probably around 1.5 years ago. And once I started discovering what travel does to you and how it can change you, something clicked. And I remember my first trip. I went to Berlin,
Mm-hmm.
coming back, and it was like the home didn't change, but something in my mind changed. And
Okay.
from there, I started traveling more and more. I moved to Barcelona without pretty much knowing anyone or not even what I did. But that situation of me being uncomfortable and embracing this uncertainty, I think brought a lot of growth to myself. And when I came back from Barcelona, I traveled again, and I traveled alone, I think, which is an interesting thing to mention because you have to engage in conversations, you have to talk to people. You're forced to basically because you don't have anyone else that's along with you.
Mm-hmm.
And this part uh, of being forced to meet people really brings growth to your own life. So traveling really expands your horizon in every way you can imagine.
Okay. Okay. Great. Great. And your third quote we have here is be as generous as you can, but selfish enough to get your work done.
It's a very important quote, and I try to use it more and more these days. I would like to say that I'm a helpful person. I try to help where I can. And doing so, I oftentimes neglect my own priorities. So it's important for me to set boundaries, and this quote hits it pretty well. It's be generous on one part, but also selfish enough to get your own work done, because at the end of the day, it matters that you have your priorities and you follow them. You can still help people, but make sure to essentially get your own work done.
Okay. Okay. Very good. All right. Let's move on to your takeaways. You're going to, you can start with your first takeaway and tell us about it, and we'll discuss it a bit more.
Yes. So I wrote down, you don't have to be an artist to read this book or to be a creative person. The title is still like an artist, but it can be a little misleading. Like I said in the beginning, I work as a project manager, but this book is eye-opening in every way possible. Um, you don't have to be an artist to be a creative person. You can be anyone, but creativity is like it's a bonus to have in your day-to-day life. I work a lot of people. I have to delegate tasks. I have to manage people, and doing so and bringing in creativity, I think, really makes the team perform better. It brings a lot of smiles, a lot of happiness
Hmm.
to be creative in work, and I think that's what work is about. You have to enjoy it.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Next one.
The next one would be a part of the book talks about the importance of hobbies and side projects, and it goes something like you have like keep your day job,
Hmm.
but also have hobbies. And a hobby is something that gives, but it doesn't take. For me, a hobby is something where I can relax and cut my mind off. Is I do a lot of sports. I play ice hockey, and for me, it's the feeling of once you step on the ice, everything else doesn't matter anymore. Like you have this 1 or 2 hours a day where you can really focus on that one task and not think or talk about your problems or anything else that challenges you. It's you and your hobby, and it's something that sets your mind back to zero, back to a point where you can be focused again. And also the point of having side projects. When I come home from work, I try to have, or I work on having enough energy to also pursue other things.
Hmm.
I like photography, for example. So just your day doesn't stop when you get back home from work. I think you can build up energy that you can live, or that you can be active for more than those 8 hours at work.
Okay. Okay. All right. Next takeaway.
Yes, um, it's about starting with what you have. Um, like I can talk from my experience. It has always been about dreaming big, but my problem is I would never get started. Like I had these huge ideas of maybe uh, funding a startup and running my own business, but I would never get started because they were just too big. And what I've learned, and also through a lot of books, and still like an artist being one of them, is start with what you have. Start small. I still get those crazy big ideas, but what I do
Hmm.
now is I write them down
Hmm.
and I keep them in the back of my head, but really focus on the small things. I mentioned photography, for example. I will not be a professional photographer anytime soon. I don't even have the right equipment, but I still start. I still take great pictures. I use my phone. I borrow a great camera from friends. Just use the things you have, and you'll get started that way. And also, if that means just showing up, then show
Yeah.
up. I try
Definitely.
to go to as many events as possible, meet so many people, and just create your own world, create your own environment, meet new people. Opportunities will arise sooner or later. So just get out there.
Okay. Okay. Definitely. Okay. You can continue with your remaining takeaways.
Yes. So talking about maybe give me a second. I need to think right now. Um, yes, I would like to go back to the travel part. Um, for me, it was unclear for a lot of time what I want to do with in the future, and I
Mm-hmm.
struggled with it a lot in high school. What I did was try to get some actual work or try to get real experience in the real world. So whenever I could, I would do internships. I would have a look into so many different sectors. I was in banking. I was a journalist. I was working as a waiter, and as I mentioned earlier, opportunities will arise. When I worked as a waiter, I met some people from Berlin, and then half a year later, I went on my first flight to Berlin, and I met there, and they showed me around. So there's this great quote from Steve Jobs, and it goes, "You can't connect the dots looking forward; you can only connect them looking backwards." And I think that's once you realize this quote and once you actually understand it, then life is a little different. It may not
Mm-hmm.
happen today or tomorrow, but one day when you look back, then it makes click and you get it.
Okay. Okay. All right. And any remaining ones?
Yes, sometimes, and I come back to business, people are scared of sharing their ideas or sharing their
Hmm.
secrets.
Yes.
But you don't have to be. Like, great ideas come and go. The worst you can get is someone else starting this business of yours, and they still have the same chance of you failing. So don't try to hide in some corner in some room. Just be out there. Maybe you'll meet some guy, someone that will eventually be your co-founder or anything. Just
Yeah.
go out there, talk to people about your interests, and then you can connect with them. And if you go down the road, one day those people will be more important than that first idea you maybe had and you wanted to keep a secret. So just embrace embrace living.
Very, 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 very good advice. Very good advice. It's a very interesting perspective that you gathered from these from the quotes and also from the book. This kind of leads me to the next question. And is there a takeaway, for example, that maybe completely or somewhat changed your perspective after reading this book, that challenged your way of thinking in some way or some additional insight?
I would say a lot of the quotes and takeaways I got from this book were ones that I've already somewhat felt but never
Mm-hmm.
really realized. So
Okay.
first and foremost, the book was really eye-opening. Um, a thought that challenged me was one of the final quotes in the book, and it goes like, "You can't move forward if you're looking back." I had to think a lot when I read the quote because I'm a very reflective person. I
Mm.
journal a lot. I think about my actions, and his quote is basically, you can't look back, otherwise you won't progress.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it's true to a point, but I also think that um, reading yourself, and that will only work through reflection, is an essential part of progressing. So, all right, okay, don't spend too much time thinking about your past, whether it's good or bad, but learn from it and go on with that.
Okay. All right. Sometimes, for example, especially reading, different nonfiction books in, personal and professional development, we read books, but also some important actionable advice. So, is there some actionable advice that, for example, that you have maybe incorporated for yourself or that you think other people reading this book that it could help them or encourage them to maybe take some steps afterwards, meaning becoming more confident or something like this, or just taking the plunge.
Hmm. I do think there's some very good advice in the book. One of them being people are afraid of putting themselves out there, of
Hmm.
sharing their knowledge or recording a podcast or creating a video. But there's one quote in the book. I can't remember exactly how it goes, but it's basically about uh, enjoying the fact of being unknown. Like uh, you feel like you're in the spotlight all the time, when in reality everyone feels like that. You feel like all the people are watching you,
Hmm.
and the person next to you feels exactly the same about themselves. So embrace being unknown, do things, and what matters is once your work is great, then you can hope that they will find it. But once you're unknown, just try things. Just put yourself out there.
Okay, all right. So we were
Like
talking.
I can
Sorry,
talk from
continue.
my experience.
Yeah,
I can
continue.
talk from my experience. I was very young when I went to all these startup events, and first it felt so strange. There were all these people, and they were a lot older than me. They were smarter than me. They had way more experience. But yeah, you can't change that. Just the fact that you go there is a bonus for me. And
Okay.
once you started to go to more and more events, it felt more and more natural. So just as I said, put yourself out there.
Yes, I think you bring up some. I think you bring up a great point because, as you said, we met in a event, and when you go to a startup event, you have people at different stages in their journey. People who they may not even have an idea, but they're interested in the startup community. You have people who are maybe a founder who had an exit or someone who's in between. What advice would you give someone who's contemplating or maybe feel maybe a bit insecure? I want to go, but I'm not sure, and because there could be a lot of pressure, and your first time going to those type of events, or even better, maybe this book kind of helps facilitate that process and letting you know that we're kind of all experiencing the same thing at different stages.
Yeah, yeah. Um, what helped me a lot was finding someone with similar interests in my surroundings. So when I got started, I did absolutely not know who to talk to. Especially where I grew up, the startup scene wasn't as big as it has come to be now, and so I really struggled where to go to with all my ideas. And then one day I just shared some posts on LinkedIn. For example, that's how I got started. And once you put some information out there, then other people will notice. And I was lucky in that part to have met, actually was my neighbor and my cousin, and we started talking and we had some drinks and just chatting about business. And then it went one by one. You talked to him, you went to events with him. Like I had this one person, I formed a deep connection about these topics, and I progressed from there. We
Mm-hmm.
went to events, and then one day you became confident enough to go there by yourself. So I think the main issue is really getting started, as you mentioned, but find ways to start really small, whether it's sharing or even only reposting things on social media about you're interested in, whether that's photography, whether that's starting a business. It doesn't matter. Just try to share something. That's the only way people will actually get in touch with you.
Okay. Okay. You said you worked as a project manager. How could this book, in some ways, be helpful for project managers?
I mentioned it earlier, the part of creativity. I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of times my day is about being stuck in front of the computer and not actually talking to people face to face. And I also see that with a lot of other project managers in our agency. What I try to do is prioritize my work as much as possible. So you'll have your time when you're in front of the computer, but when possible, stand up and go to people, talk to them face to face, bring in fun, bring the fun part into work, be more creative, think outside the box. So you just constantly have to challenge the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Okay. All right. Very good. Um, you read this book in English. English is not your mother tongue. How was this process for you? What is your to get a better idea of, you're reading a book in a language you have an advanced level in English. Are there any obstacles? Do you have to sometimes look at words, expressions? Do you learn interesting phrases? Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think my English has progressed a lot thanks to reading, but not only through reading. Like I watch a lot of, or not too much anymore, but I used to watch a lot of films, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that helped me with pronunciation. The grammar side was mainly because of school.
Mm-hmm.
We had a pretty good teacher in English, and but then it's about practicing. It doesn't matter if you're singing English, because I know that for some people in some areas it's difficult to speak English.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't have the opportunities. I speak English because part of my work is with English partners, so I'm used to speaking English, also thanks to traveling. But if you can't find people to speak to, then just try to maybe sing songs. You don't have to be a great singer. You just pick up the words and you try to mesh them together.
Okay.
And practice, practice, practice. I
Okay.
think that's the most important part. And I still practice English a lot. I'm journaling in English,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that helps a lot. And if I don't know how to pronounce a word the right way or how to spell it, then I always look it up, so that you'll get it right.
Okay. All right. Great. Do you typically read these books like a physical copy, ebook, audiobook, or do you have a preference?
I'm I'm pretty much reading every book as a physical copy.
Okay. Okay. So you
Yeah.
maybe highlight or have some notes or post-its inside these books.
Yes, exactly. I use a. Let's see. I'm not sure how you say it in English now. Hold on. A bookmark, right?
Bookmark.
Um, so I have my bookmarks and I
Uh-huh.
put a post-it on it. What I do is I try when I read, I want to read. I don't want to write anything next to it, and I also don't want to make any marks in the book. So it's a particular thing of mine.
Okay.
So I put post-its on my bookmark, and
Okay.
once I find an interesting quote or some really important takeaway, I merely write down the number of the page and whether it's on the top, in the middle, or in the bottom.
Okay.
And once I finish the book, I someday in the week when I find the time, I will sit down and I have a file on the computer where I write those takeaways down. But
Okay.
when I'm reading, I really try to read because I enjoy the process of reading and I don't want to be disrupted by writing down some notes. So I
Okay.
use
Okay.
that technique, but I think everyone has to find their own way of
Exactly.
of
Exactly.
writing things down.
Okay, okay. All right, so we're going to move on to part two, which is the lightning round. I'm going to ask you some questions related to, English, personal and professional development, etc. Okay, so let's start with the first question. Why is it important for a project manager to develop in a professional and personal sense, whether it's through reading books, taking courses, or anything related to that?
Um, in management, I think the most important skill is communication and leading people. It doesn't matter what stage. I'm very young, so I'm not a manager high up, but I still work with so many different people, and it's a key to get these things right. And there's so many great books out there, I think, that can teach you a lot of things, but a book only gets you so far. Um, Once you read it, once you write down your notes, you'll have to put it to use. And I try to do this as much as possible. It's also um, one of the current books I'm reading is The Making of a Manager. So it's
Okay.
basically only about management, but I don't only read about um, the making of a manager now. I also read about communication, creativity, so many different aspects, and you just take bits and pieces from every book and try to put it at work to use at work.
Okay. All right. So do you have a reading habit, meaning that a certain amount of books that you read per month or uh, on a daily basis, like a reading schedule or in some way?
That's a really interesting question. You know, 2 years ago, if you were to ask me that question, I would say I try to read as much as possible, as many books
Mm-hmm.
as possible. And the problem with that being was I read books as fast as I could, and I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't remember a thing.
Okay.
And nothing was put to use. And it took me some time to actually realize it. But once I figured it out, uh, the one thing was I slowed down. I tried not to read books for the sake of reading books. I
Mm-hmm.
tried to read books to really get information and put it to use. So the number of books I read now has decreased. I think I read about one book a month,
Okay.
and but I don't stress myself on reading as much as possible anymore. I just try to get the most out of every single page I read, and creating this, I call it the file I have on a computer is like my database
Okay.
of personal development, of growth.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
so it's a place where I collect all the inputs from my books.
Okay. Okay. Great. How do you discover new books? Do you usually, you find them on another podcast, a friend recommends the book to you, and or a little bit of everything?
It's pretty much a little bit of everything.
Mm.
A lot of books were recommended to me, um, but I do find some pretty good books online through social media, for example. I think that's where you get a lot of books about, or like biographies, for example. I read biographies from Steve Jobs, from Barack Obama. You get them from social media. Oh, look, he wrote a biography, or this and that guy wrote a really interesting book. So it's pretty much anywhere. I get books recommended by people. I wouldn't say I have a go-to platform where I find new books.
Okay. All right. Perfect. All right. So, as I said before, we chose one of your three top favorite books, and that we just, sorry, that we discussed today. Still like an artist, but there were two other books that I think could be useful based on the learning community of the fluent readers. And I would like you to just simply, talk a little bit about why you also chose these books and why you would maybe possibly recommend them as well. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
So I think sorry,
Yes.
one of the most influential books I've read was a book called Getting There by Gillian Siegel. And it's basically a series of mini biographies from one of or some of the world's most inspirational people to me. Some of them you will know for sure, like Warren Buffett, or someone maybe in the music industry like Hans Zimmer. But also so many people I didn't even know, and they had great stories. And the book is basically it's around 3 pages of, so to say, biographies, and then one whole page or even more of key takeaways. And I think that's amazing, because there are people from every industry, whether it's investing, whether that's uh, food, whether it's entertainment, journalism. It's pretty much from each industry you could think of, and you can pick those people, and learn from them. I think that's amazing. And the other book is about startups. It's the book the $100 Startup.
Hmm.
And I really like it because it's all about the idea of starting small. It's not about these hugely funded startups with venture capitalism involved. It's about the small ideas that build up to businesses, whether that's a small business or even if it turns to a bigger business one day. But it's all about getting started with what you have and starting small. And I really like it because I think so many people want to build their own thing, but get stuck trying
Hmm.
to find these huge investment deals. So just to let people know that you can build a small business as well and make that your passion and your dream. I think that's just fine.
Okay, perfect. And lastly, what are maybe some advice or suggestions you would give to a professional who, English isn't their native language. They may have an upper intermediate level. The creating a reading practice in English. I know you mentioned a little bit about, your relationship with the English language, but anything of maybe promoting, reading these books because this industry, there are thousands of books that are published each year. You seem to have your own personal list of books to read, etc. But is there any advice or suggestions that you would give maybe someone who's doesn't read so much, or maybe a younger person who's at where you were maybe a few years ago of encouraging? Well, I would recommend maybe reading these books for a specific reason, whether it's for startups or just a professional development in general.
Absolutely. I think when you get started, try to focus on things you're already somewhat familiar with. That could be sports, and you can read, I don't know, a book or a biography from your favorite football player, from your favorite hockey player. Just pick areas you're already familiar with, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that makes it much more easier. And secondly, even though it's difficult, you have to stick to it. I remember some of the first books I read in English. I'd always, like, I built up my own library
Mm-hmm.
where I had, on the one hand, I had the book, and on the other hand, I had my computer where I would look up all the words that I didn't understand. And that was it wasn't fun. I didn't enjoy reading that much back then because you had to look up so many different words and you get stuck on a book for so much more time and you couldn't just read. But that's just the problems and the challenges of getting started. But as you read more and as you stay consistent, I think that the problem fades away more and more, and you'll actually be happy because you have an achievement to celebrate.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'd like to thank you for your time, Tobias, for joining us today and covering the books on me still like an artist, and also providing us with other book recommendations that we could possibly read in the future. So thank you again for your time, your advice, and sharing with us.
Thank you very much for the great opportunity. It was a pleasure.
All right, take care.
Take care. Bye.